Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to talk about a novel with a kind of religious title, Sacred Hearts. And it is published by Random House, and the author who is with us is Sarah Dunant.
Beautifully pronounced. Thank you. Not everybody gets it right.
And, I think, well, I was going to begin with the research. But before I get to the research, I want to say this, that your novel is a pain in the neck because it takes you out of this life that you're living and puts you in that convent. And you can't get out until you come to the very end. It is beautifully done.
Oh, thank you.
Beautifully done. Now, I'm not supposed to start there, but that's where my heart is. And emotionally, I was really, really into the book.
Thank you so much, because you know what? A lot of people would look at the cover of this book and see the subject matter, which is that it's nuns, and they would think, if there's one thing this book is not, it's for men. And actually, I really think it's a great book for men to read. So the fact that you read it and liked it means a great deal to me. In fact, would you write that on my arm now? So
okay, sure. We'll get a better pen.
Right, okay.
Now, Santa Caterina is the convent, and it's in a place called Ferrara. And Ferrara actually exists to this day. Ferrara
actually exists and is the most fantastic city because it's not full of tourists, but it is still absolutely echoing the past. It has a beautiful Renaissance quarter and a beautiful medieval quarter, but also the convent of Santa Caterina under another name.
Another name, yeah.
Still exists.
It's still there.
Yep, it's still there, and not only that, it's still an enclosed convent, which means that there are nuns in that convent who have never come out since they went in. Now, the past I'm writing about 5 centuries ago, that was a lot of very noble and interesting women. Now there are just 17 women
in there. Goodness.
Because I actually went round the convent, was shown around by one. They can show you in, they just can't get out.
They can't get out, yeah. Now, the novel is set in 1570.
Yeah.
And it's around the time that something called the Council of Trent had just concluded, and those bishops and cardinals, at the very last end of Trent, issued a whole bunch of regs concerning convents and nuns.
Yeah. What happens is it's the Council of Trent is the Counter-Reformation, and it's in reaction to Luther's very potent criticisms of the Catholic Church. And one of the things that Luther goes for in the Catholic Church is the problems with celibacy and chastity in the nunneries and in the monasteries. You should know, he's a monk. He leaves his monastery and he marries a nun. So obviously he gets that there's a problem here. But as a result, when they come to react against Protestantism, they worry about nuns and scandals in convents.
All that kind of
stuff. But they don't worry creatively about it. What they do is to decide to shut the whole thing down, to shut it up. And what they basically do is they build all the walls higher all around the nuns. They take away some of their instruments in the orchestra. They stop letting them write plays. They stop letting them have any freedom at all. And up until then, it had not been such a terrible deal to be a nun. There may have been no choice, but you could do stuff in the convent you weren't allowed to do outside.
Well, let's look at the situation up until then, because the convent that you describe is a Benedictine convent.
Yep.
And much in the spirit of what Saint Benedict set out to do, it is a self-sustaining place.
Yes.
Tell us how that works. It's amazing to me to read that.
Yes, it's
they got everything going on in that convent.
Yeah, some of these monasteries and convents actually were like small little estates, and they balanced their own books. So in this convent, there'll be women copying manuscripts, illustrating manuscripts. They'll be doing embroidery for noble weddings or whatever. They'll be producing a lot of their own produce because it's big enough, and they've got servants looking after the more noble women. So a good abbess could run a little country here.
Aha.
And when
this abbess does.
Oh, well, this abbess is a smart woman, actually. Somebody said to me the other day, I think of Hillary Clinton when I'm reading this book and your abbess. And I thought, that's on the money, actually.
One of the interesting notions here that we have about convents and nuns and so on is that they don't have much or almost any freedom. But you write, outside these walls, free women will live their whole lives dictated by the decisions of others, yet inside, to a remarkable extent, they govern themselves. Here, each and every nun has a voice and a vote. And that blew me away.
It's amazing, isn't it? And you know why it happens? It's because the Benedictine order, which was originally male, allowed all of the monks to vote in all the positions of power with a special room, a chapter, where they went to have their meetings. And when it turned to nuns, they just reproduced the architecture and they reproduced the vote. Smart of them. I think you're going to find that Sacred Heart is a very rich book because it tells two stories. And we'll try to follow them when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Sacred Hearts, that's the name of the book. It's a wonderful novel. The author, Sarah Dunant, is with us. It's published by Random House. And our friends at Publishers Weekly say in part, a cast of complex characters breathe new life into the classic star-crossed lovers trope, while affording readers a look at a facet of Renaissance life beyond the far more common viscounts and courtesans. Dunant's an accomplished storyteller, and this is a rich and rewarding novel.
I didn't pay them very much.
No, you should have paid them a little more. I don't like trope. The downer. There are times in Sacred Hearts when I think that the two stories become one, like at the feast of St. Agnes the Martyr, when Serafina, the novice, decides to sing. Up until this time, she has withheld her voice from the community because she hates it.
Yep.
But she decides now to sing. Is that enough setup?
That's brilliant.
Would you read, please?
I certainly will. The novice has found her voice. Within the great equality of God's love, it is not considered healthy to pick out the single from the several, the particular thread from within the weave. There are, however, moments, and there are voices, and when the two come together, it can be impossible, even undesirable, to resist. Many of those present will talk later of it as a small but perfect miracle. On both sides of the grill, they will search for words to describe the sound of the voice they heard, likening it first to the concentrated sweetness of the honeycomb or warm grain inside the wood, then contradicting themselves to speak of the burning flash of a comet, the purity of ice, even the shining transparency of heavenly bodies. But those who will do it most justice will speak not of the voice itself, but of how it made them feel. The old and the pious will speak of a piercing of their heart, so that they found it hard to breathe, a penetration which, though painful, unleashed a flow of love like Christ's blood gushing under the centurion's spear, or the joy of the Virgin Madonna as the words of the angel Gabriel entered her breast. In contrast, the young will recall feeling it most powerfully in their gut, which is where another kind of love resides, though they will claim the arrow entered through the heart, and both young and old will, without noticing, hold their hands to their hearts while recalling the moment. And once they have tried to outdo each other in hyperbole, they will sit back exhausted, quietly satisfied that their city is indeed a musical paradise, so much that God sees fit to send new angels into its midst to guide its citizens on its way.
See, what you're describing there is so difficult to describe, because what you're describing is the universality of good art, of beautiful singing, that each one, hears it in his or her own way. What a great job.
Oh, well, it's very hard writing about music, of course.
Yes.
It's very hard writing about something oral that you have to find words to describe.
But, all right, so at that moment, I think both stories kind of coalesce. But Serafina remains very dedicated to getting out.
Yeah.
She's working on a plan, and she developed a way to use wax to put around pebbles or rocks and throw it over the wall to hopefully to her lover. Mm-hmm. And she succeeds. Mm-hmm. She succeeds. I don't know.
But we never know if she's going to get out.
No, that's, I mean, you've written mysteries.
I didn't know either.
Well, you wouldn't because you're a mystery writer. You have to wait till you get to the end.
It's true.
True. At the same time this is going on, the convent is faced with political conflict brought on by those last-minute decrees of the Council of Trent and by, I think, the narrow vision of the novice mistress, Sister Humiliana.
Perfect.
Like humility.
Or humility or humiliated. Isn't that interesting?
I didn't like her. How about you?
Well, you see, I grew to like her more. When you write books, you have to like even the characters that you're not going to like because you have to understand them.
Right.
And I grew to think that this old woman now had always wanted to find God and have visions, and she never had. So when she got her hands on a young woman who might do it for her, that was really exciting for her. So she believes, but she's never seen, whereas there are other people who don't really believe and who maybe do see.
Yeah. What she really wanted was the kind of transporting experience that others could or would have.
Ecstasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And now there's this kind of a humorous fellow in this book, Father Romero.
That's because he's the only guy in the convent.
He has problems staying awake while hearing confession.
Yes. Well, I wanted to write a novel entirely about women. I wanted to make a republic of women, and they had to have a father confessor, so I made him very, very, very old and to fall asleep a lot, so he didn't say a lot.
In Sacred Hearts, there is one other figure who looms large, Madonna Chiara, the abbess. More about her when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Sacred Hearts is the title of a novel you better go out and read right away by Sarah Dunant, and it's published by Random House and an online publication. We're catching up to the 21st century here, called Daily Beast, says Dunant, author of the international sensation, Birth of Venus, conjures a heady brew of passion and faith, once again revealing a hidden part of the Renaissance we rarely see. That you have done.
Thank you.
That you have done.
I do a lot of work in order to do it, I promise. It's not easy.
Yeah, there's an author's note in the back in which the sweat almost comes off the page.
Good. I'm pleased you felt my pain.
about the research. Now, Madonna Chiara. Madonna Chiara is a very narrowly focused person because you say of her that she's really never lived anywhere else but the convent. Mm-hmm. What's her backstory?
Mm-hmm. She comes from a very noble family, and this was the time when very noble women, if there were more than one or two daughters in the family, would not find flesh and blood husbands, so they would be married to Christ. But because they came from very noble families, it often meant that they were quite capable and smart, and very often family factions within the cities they lived in meant that they would gain positions of power.
Yeah, so she was a real insider in terms of the power structure in the city.
And she would have come in at the age of 7, where she would have been educated. They would have known right from the beginning that this was going to be her world. And in a sense, because she would know no other, and because she had quite a lot of power within that world, Bob, which women didn't have outside the walls, she ran a little political state in here. And as you said, there's trouble from Rome out there. There's pressures. Mm-hmm. She has to handle the politics coming from the church, and she has to keep her nuns stable in the community.
Yeah, and she has a rival budding like crazy.
Yep.
Melina.
Yep.
And but the thing is, she's great at diplomacy. Mm-hmm. Great at diplomacy, and she has an affectation that I am familiar with because I've dealt with superiors of houses, of religious houses. I won't tell you why, but I have. And they always tend to be the neatest person in the convent or the seminary. And they're always, brushing themselves, and you have her doing that. And I said, I know all about that. I understand that.
Thank you, because there's a point when she does it when you're supposed to realize that she's not telling the truth.
That's right.
So, see,
That's right.
Well done.
Now, the real Achilles heel of her is that she'll do anything to build up Santa Caterina. And the reason why is because, as you said, that's all she knows.
Yes, yes.
But my favorite character in the book is the pharmacy, that sister.
Swarazuana.
Yeah, tell us about her. She's fantastic. Now, she comes in from a very different place.
Yeah.
Her life before she came is dominated by her father, who is a medical doctor and a scientist.
Yeah, and that's all true. Ferrara had a great medical school at this time.
Uh-huh.
It was even doing anatomy every second year. It was dissecting bodies. And her father really knew his stuff. And she was an only child. Her mother had died. And he kind of used her as his student. But of course, he dies. She's 22 years old. She's too old to get married. She doesn't have a lot of dowry. But because she comes from a reasonably good name, she gets a place in the convent. And she doesn't want to come at first. But in the convent, she can make her own herb garden. She can run her own distillery. She can run her own dispensary. And using books of remedies, she can sort of be a doctor. She has 100 nuns under her care. Nowhere outside the walls of the nunnery would she have been given that kind of power.
And she is very, very important, I think, because she brings, because of that background, a different sensibility to the convent, different from anybody else there. And she becomes a worthy adversary, I would say, of the abbess.
Yes, and I think she becomes the abbess's conscience. To a certain extent, actually. She becomes almost the mother of this young, screaming novice who doesn't want to stay. And then, towards the end of the book, she becomes the conscience of the abbess. So she was a really interesting character, not least, of course, because I had to become a semi-doctor from the 15th or 16th century to write her, because I had to work out exactly what are the medications she's using and the remedies she's applying.
Well, one of the diseases you mentioned that I never heard of before, holy anorexia. What the heck? Is that where she's starving herself to death to get closer to God?
You know, there is a big debate among scholars as to whether or not anorexia, as we now recognize it, existed within the past. Now young women become anorexic, often because life is throwing too many choices at them and they don't know what the hell to do, so they control the one thing they can control is food. Then in the past, young women did it partly because they had no choice, but they wanted to find God, and they did it by scourging or fasting the body in order to arrive at the spirit.
We're not going to tell you anything more about this great book called Sacred Hearts. You've got to go get your own copy. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.